Welcome to Liner Notes. My name is David Bixler.
As an improviser, trombonist Joe Fiedler describes himself as living half in the inside world and half in the outside world. This is evident in his new recording, Will Be Fire. For this project, Fiedler collaborates with guitarist Pete McCann, tuba virtuoso Marcus Rojas, and percussionist Jeff Davis in an elegant instrumentation that pays homage to the late Arthur Blythe. In this episode of Liner Notes, Joe articulates his perspective on the evolution of the trombone and his aspirations for its further direction. Joe, welcome to Liner Notes. Good afternoon on this snowy day in New York City. Finally, I'm not the biggest fan of the snow, but it feels like life is normal again. So I'm glad you took the time to speak with us about your new recording, Will Be Fire, out in November of this year. So first of all, great to see you again, man, and welcome.
Thank you so much, David, for having me, man. It's been too long. We haven't connected in a minute, but it's great.
Yeah,
thank you.
New York's like that, so many
it
cats.
Is.
Everyone's kind of doing their thing. But a great record, and I want to come to the music. But first, like talking a little bit about your background. I think we met originally when you had just moved here from Pittsburgh in 1993, which gives you 3 decades in the city. And, you've had like kind of a quintessential career, like doing, in the trenches, like a lot of, salsa gigs, which is really evident in your soloing, just that kind of, and I'm saying that in a positive way.
No,
sure.
I hear you.
And, Broadway, a lot of big band and small group work. And then, the MD at Sesame Street, which is also you, as an artist, you turned this into some creative projects, which is really cool. So maybe, just and touch a little bit. I'm kind of interested in the Sesame Street thing.
Sure.
And I think, because that's such a cultural piece of America, and to like be able to bridge your artistic sensibilities with, something that we all grew up with here, maybe talk about how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of, it's interesting, because there's a straight line coming straight out of what you just laid out. Unlike, as a young cat in New York, I did all the things you said, but for money, for like most of the guys I knew did wedding gigs, and I just didn't have the stomach for that. It was just my personality. So I just immersed myself in the Latin scene, and thankfully I took to it really well, and they took to me really well, and I kind of ascended the ranks pretty quickly, till I finally, played for 17 years with Eddie Palmieri and played with Celia Cruz and Larry Harlow and, legendary figures, and recorded with all of them as well. And so because of that scene, just very interestingly, I had no idea Lin-Manuel Miranda was, before Hamilton was preparing to do his first show, In the Heights. And they had a music team assembled, and I found out after the fact that they wanted, especially the brass players, not to be your typical Broadway player. They wanted, because I had never even done any Broadway at that point. They wanted guys who could really play Latin music, because the music was clearly Latin themed. So actually, they came and scouted me. They came to some gigs I was on, and then I got offered the gig. And me and the lead trumpet player Raul Agras from Venezuela, we had done, literally 1,000 gigs together and hundreds of recordings, and they hired both of us. And then through that, one of the orchestrators, the co-orchestrator of In the Heights, is a guy named Bill Sherman. And he, right after that, got hired by Sesame Workshop to be music director for the Electric Company, which is a show from the 70s that they were re-firing up. And this is, maybe 15 years ago, or 18 years ago now. And so anyway, a quick story. So in the rehearsals for In the Heights, because the orchestrators, even though they're super talented, weren't really super experienced in Latin music. And I was going through a really bad divorce at the time, and kind of had a little bit of a sad tone to me myself. And we were at this rehearsal, and the music wasn't right, because I had arranged for Palmieri and Harlow and all, and not that I'm some expert, but I knew what I was talking about, especially in regards to clave. So I kind of stopped the band and said, no. And I did it, instead of being a jerk about it, I was at least constructive. I'm like, we need to switch the accent here. You're against the clave and blah, blah, blah. And because of that moment, then this guy, Bill Sherman, when he needed some horns for the electric company show, he called me. He said, you know your horn writing. So for 3 seasons, I worked with Bill. They had a house band, and the horns were just an add-on, but I did all the horn writing, and I played on it. And then just coincidentally, they were canceling electric company after 3 seasons, but at the same time, Sesame Workshop wanted to make a change in their music department. So they offered the job to Bill. But Bill was involved with a lot of other projects, and really, he needed someone to kind of be the hands-on guy and kind of do all the orchestrating and compose all the underscoring, and he would be more like the music supervisor position. So we came on together. He is my boss, but we're both music directors of the show, and we've been there now. It'll be 15 years this fall. So that's how that all came to be.
And then what spurred the idea of turning this into kind of a jazz improvisation project?
Well, I thought, most of my career, I've lived in my improvisatory situation is definitely this in the cracks guy. I live half in the inside world and half in the outside world. So it's kind of could be a forgotten niche, like if I played more avant-garde and completely free, there are actually more opportunities to play that way, or if I was a straight ahead player. And it's the kind of guys who straddle that fence. And it's not, I don't say this in a sad way, I'm totally comfortable living there. But so I thought, man, I'm not a gimmick guy at all. But after I had been there maybe 9 or 10 years, I thought, man, why don't I use my Sesame Street platform and do my own kind of avant-garde arrangements of some classic Sesame tunes. And I thought that would be just an interesting story. I definitely didn't compromise musically at all, but I thought and it's not some guy, Joe Blow, playing Sesame Street tunes. It's actually the music director of Sesame Street playing those tunes. So I thought it would be fun. And we did a couple CDs of that did well, but, time to move on to something else then.
Right. Did you have to get permission to use that music?
I didn't, as long as I had to just pay the royalties. But once that was taken care of, no. I thought there might be a big deal, or they might not be into it. But actually, for the first record, the record release was at Dizzy's, at Jazz at Lincoln Center, and they were so supportive. Actually, the executive producer and all the people from Sesame Street came to the show, which is really, sweet of them.
That's very cool. All right. Well, let's jump into the new project, and listed on your website as the new quartet. Again, the title will be Fire, and it features yourself and guitarist Pete McCann, Marcus Rojas on tuba, and Jeff Davis on drums. I was reading the liner notes, and you talk about you were influenced by Arthur Blythe's band, the same instrumentation. I vaguely remember it was kind of a big deal, maybe late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
But you talk about this as being an influence. So maybe talk about how this came about and your relationship with these cats.
Okay. Yeah, I'm always searching just sonically for a different way to present myself. I've been a big mute user my whole career, and just to get different colors and different shadings of tone. And I was just, to be honest, I was a little exhausted with that of myself. And I wanted to, instead of just playing open horn trombone stuff, I thought, first of all, I would find a different way to kind of shade my tone. And that's why I started messing around with electronics. I used to play with electronics a lot in the 90s. I never recorded, but just on live performances. So I kind of dug back into that. And it was really fascinating that it's just how you improvise. I don't know if you've ever messed around with that. It just all of a sudden, I had very different ideas and different lines, just because of how I was hearing myself back through different effects. And I didn't want it to be completely electric. So it's about like half acoustic, and it's more of a shading again of electronics. But then so I had that as one concept. And the other concept, I wanted to kind of orchestrate a group in a different way, just not bass, piano, drums, or some traditional setup as I've been using, like many people. And it's interesting because when I listen to music at home, I listen to my iTunes on shuffle. Stuff comes up I haven't heard in 15 years. And one day this Arthur Blythe came up, and I it was just blown away. I'd forgotten how heavy that orchestration with alto sax, tuba, no bass, drums, and electric guitar. And some of those records also had cello. Abdul Wadud is on those, who blows my mind. And I also had some experience. I played with Bob Stewart's quintet for a while and did a European tour. And so Bob was always talking about, he was the tuba on those records, was always talking about those bands. And he really turned me on to some more of the obscure records too, Bob did. So anyway, I kind of just went down that rabbit hole, and the orchestration and the freshness, and especially the interaction between Bob and Arthur, because they were dear friends in addition to being, bandmates. And so I thought, I had been playing so many years with Marcus Rojas, and he's in my brass group, Big Sack Bud, and we have this great rapport as well. So I thought this would be a great foundation to really change up the orchestration, especially adding the electronics on the trombone. Is for better or for worse, I think it's a very unique sound, and I'm really happy with that. But so that was the impetus. Musically, I think the music I wrote for this record is really not related to Bob's. It's more about the sound and the dynamic between the soloist and the tuba. So, and I think in my own way, I was able to achieve that. Also, selecting players, it's funny, Pete McCann and he's one of the first kind of really good friends I had in New York, and we were playing in a band called Tree. It was a drummer from New Zealand named Ed Ware, he left New York a long time ago. And it was just a trio with Pete and me and this drummer. And I used to actually a lot of electronics in that band too. And so I immediately thought of Pete as this just symbiotic guy, especially with the electronics. And I know he's a master of effects. And then just rounding out, it was funny, I hadn't even thought about the drums. And then for many, many years, my primary band was a trio, just bass, trombone, and drums. And Michael Serene has always been my drummer. But my main sub has always been Jeff Davis. Jeff and I are just old buddies as well. And he subbed in my Open Sesame band, and I've just used him as a sub for literally 20 years, and I thought, man, come on, I got to throw Jeff a bone. He's such a great player, and he needs to be in one of my groups. So that's kind of how it all came together.
All right. Had you done some gigs and some like workshopping of the tunes before you went into the studio with this stuff?
We did. Interestingly, I like to usually do a lot of gigs leading up to the recording, but we did a few gigs maybe 6 to 9 months before. And then as the gig world, I'm sure you know, I get people in all the time, I wanted to book a bunch of gigs. I mean, just little door gigs, and I just couldn't even get a gig. It became like, like all the places in Brooklyn were just booked, and it's such a different, coming out of COVID, it was a different energy. And so what I did instead is I had paid rehearsals. I used like rehearsals as just gigs, and we kind of performed in a rehearsal studio together as in lieu of doing it in front of people. And I thought it worked just as well, to be honest, and much less headache in some regard,
Okay. Also, I read in the liner notes that you're talking about the sound and sonic diversity, which you've done, obviously, in the instrumentation and the use of electronics. But, I wanted to just ask you to unpack a little bit about your statement that you've been struck recently by how codified the modern jazz trombone has become. Maybe, explain exactly what you mean.
Well, I don't want to mention any names because a lot of people who I really respect I just want to pick my words carefully. I just think the nuance and sound and the exploration of sound, which has always been not just part of the trombone legacy, it's part of all instruments. And to me, the big fork in the road goes back to the 40s into the 50s when, one leading trombonist, J.J. Johnson, you may have heard of. And then the other to me was Bill Harris, who was at the titan of the swing style, who were both roughly the same age, whereas the Rhodes part, JJ kind of leads obviously the revolution of modern jazz trombone playing, and it's wonderful. I have zero beef with any of that. But Bill Harris still kept on to using the slide in a more traditional way with glisses and slides and smears and growls and retaining some of the emotional content that JJ and all the modern guys at that time, took that path. But I think we're so anyway, I think, 99% of trombone players went down, or at least modern trombone players, went down the JJ path, which, again, I have zero problem with any of it. But what I've found is we come to this modern day sound, and with so many players developing their sound through academia, which obviously they have to because the performance opportunities just don't exist as they did before. But so there's, to me, a very cookie cutter, very clean, very articulated sound that it just sonically doesn't have any personality in it, and let alone the use of the slide and using the trombone as kind of its greatest weapon to me is the slide. So if we're like forsaking this slide and kind of doing our interpretation of valves and keys, I think it's doing a disservice to the actual instrument itself. And so that's more what I mean. And again, the technical ability of that the people coming down the JJ road, when you look fast forward to like the Conrad Herwig from starting in the 80s, and how incorporating like Woody Shaw language and his clean articulation to the trombone, and then now to this Marshall Jilksian level of this prodigious, unbelievable technique and like a 3-octave range to add to it. So the technical possibilities are clearly going higher and higher and higher. But I do think that not using any kind of personal sound is really a sad thing. And I think it doesn't necessarily only affect trombonists. I think in a lot of instruments, although saxophonists, I find they're much more prone to explore personal sounds, I think, these days than trombonists, because I think trombonists are so focused on technique and not focused on sound that I think that's problematic.
So, listener, you heard it here first. The greatest weapon of the trombone is the slide.
It is. That's the thing. You're like cutting off your nose to spite your face, right?
That's fantastic. I want to talk about the electronics because I got the sense from reading about the project that the what is this? The Line 6 effects unit that you're using is new, but you talk about having used electronics in the 90s. So you do have some chops, because that's, it's not just like you can press button 3 and do this sound. It's like, you have to shed this stuff. So what kind of learning curve was it? And is this something new, something different than you were using before?
Yeah, it's a completely different setup. Actually, because I really shed it in the 90s. I mean, I went down that hole and had tried many different pedals. And back then I was just a single freelance musician. I had hours in the day to mess around with it, So, and I found something that really worked. And ironically, when I was doing In the Heights, the other trombonist on the show was the great Ryan Keberle. And he started touring with the singer Sufjan Stevens, and he wanted to use some electronics. So I actually gave him my whole electronic rig that I had set up, because I hadn't used it in years. I'm like, hey, man, try it. So when it came time to, and he still has it, which I don't, it's all fine. But so I was like, I want to get to some new stuff. But it's to speak to your point directly, what I did was there's all kinds of stuff online. There's even a website called like hornfx.com or something, where they analyze, and there's a huge descriptions of each pedal and all this analog stuff. And so what I did is I thought I'll approach it like I did back in the 90s. And I bought about 8 different pedals, and I, set up not a pedal board, but just had to lay it out on my floor here. But now, having a family and doing Sesame Street, to really tinker with that and really get it to where I thought I was totally in command of it, I could see my learning curve. It was going to be a long, long road, and I didn't have the time to devote to it as I did in the past. So what I did, I asked some other players who use electronics, and everyone said, look, the technology is so easy now with these Line 6 things. So I sold all that stuff and I bought this big Line 6 thing because everything's preset. You could just pull up little screens and you could adjust everything like this. And so it was, what I would do is I would find a patch that was kind of what I was hearing, and then to customize it was like, an hour versus like days. So I was able to kind of tweak and figure out the sounds relatively easy. I have to give it to him. It's really easy to use and sounds amazing, I think.
And so you're using this in real time during the session. You're not adding after the fact. Okay.
No.
All right. And touching on the music, it's interesting. You talk about straddling both, worlds, go like a little to the left, a little to the right. And, that's very evident. And kind of like in your blowing, at times very aggressive and angular. One thing that struck me, though, is sometimes the nature of the harmonic nature of some tunes, tends to be, rather conservative, underpinning like the electronics, the type of blowing, and then the instrumentation, which I thought was kind of cool. Was that purposeful, and all? Like all of a sudden you're going around, I'm hearing, oh, man, that's just like a 2/5, bro.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that was totally conscious. I'm not sure exactly where that comes from, but I really want to be free. I find when I write tunes that are much more harmonic complexity, I think really different about it. Even if I know the tune and I wrote it and I practice it all the time and it's like second nature, there's a way I play where I find the harmony leads me around versus me leading myself around. And I find having just simpler forms and just, a lot of those the tunes are like rock tunes. I can conceive them more as, because there's no swing. There's one swing tune, but it's just straight A's, kind of more like I conceive it more of a jazz rock thing, and like my own more perverted world of like a Medeski, Martin and Wood or something like that, or Schofield. You know what I mean? So I wanted the tunes to be simple, and then it's easier for me just to go to really go in or outside. Because I think if you have some really specific harmony and you start going free. To me, again, everyone is free to do whatever they want, of course, but I find it's not as compelling as whereas you have these simpler, bluesier forms. There's a vibe to taking it out in a certain way that really speaks, I think, in a way I wanted to. That doesn't sound so just like, well, he's just abandoning the form or something, or the changes.
Mm-hmm. All right. I want to focus on a couple of the tunes that really hit me. I really got that vibe. The first 4 tunes, really kind of funky. And at one point I remember thinking, I listened to it a couple of times, it's kind of like jazz anime, take that in the right way. It was like high energy and like, man, it was just all this action going on. And then all of a sudden you hit us with Coop. So talk about that. It starts out with guitar and bone at the beginning, kind of out of time, and then the ostinato starts, and the thing, and typical, except for it's a tuba, and so that really struck me. And I don't know if he's going into the melody or a solo, kind of hard. The line seems a little blurred before your solo, but maybe Coop. Maybe tell us what that tune's about, and maybe your process of writing that one.
Whew. Well, this is the easiest one to talk about, and also the heaviest one to talk about. This Coop is a person. My best friend is a guy named Dave Charlton. He's not a musician, and his son Cooper Charlton actually passed away in a car accident a couple years ago.
I'm sorry, man.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. So David, they're from the Cleveland, outside Cleveland area, and he was this like momentous young man, like a all-American lacrosse player. He went to University of Michigan, was class president. He was this like young star and influenced a lot of people and was really involved in charity work. So he, at the time, Cooper was living in Canada with his fiancée and got really into indigenous culture and these rituals, and it was really fascinating. So David asked me to go to this memorial in Cleveland 2 summers ago, and he wanted me to play this indigenous folk song. Like, so it's me with my trombone in front of this hundreds of people. It's like the hardest gig of my life. I thought, I'm going to take a breath, and I'm either going to like burst into tears, or I'm going to, if I could get through like the first 2 bars, I'll be okay, So, but anyway, from that experience, I wanted to write something for Cooper, who I knew very well myself, and so that's what that was all about. That tune, and it was interesting in the studio. I found there was something inside, like a feeling about that thing, about the memorial in Cleveland. I wanted to capture something for myself and for David, and I didn't feel we were getting there. So the whole thing with Pete and I playing out front, and then that morphing straight into the tuba solo, that was just something we came up with on the spot. I thought we needed a different mood and a different just feeling for me internally, just playing the melody, just to be more free with the melody, not be in time, and just have it be more floaty. And Pete's such a great accompanist, and we played so many gigs over so many years. So I was really happy that it captured what I was going for anyway.
Thank you for sharing. That's super deep and not what I was expecting to hear, but it explains the beauty and why that touched me so much. So, congratulations, mission accomplished on that as a musician. Very good.
Thank you.
The other one is West 21st. Thing that struck me that's different, it starts with atmospheric sounds, and actually is bookended with them, and then like kind of morphs into this super melancholic tune. So 21st Street in town, in Brooklyn, in Cleveland. Well, tell me about this tune.
West 21st Street, my first apartment was actually in Chelsea, back when musicians could still afford to live in Chelsea.
Living large.
Yeah, it was the very, very end of that, and it was a tiny little, that tune, what I was going for, just my whole West 21st Street experience was just this incubator of all kinds of New York elements, and the atmospheric stuff I was hearing all the time as these textural elements that, even though I heard on records, just to be in a club and you just sit in front of people and have them blow air through their horn was just such a hip thing to me as a young guy, in New York for the first time, and I just wanted to write something that felt good and that kind of reminded me of those days, of those just being such a sponge and seeing it's so much amazing music. And going back to the apartment, I had a roommate, a tenor player who doesn't live here any longer for years, but just the feeling of going back to the apartment after seeing stuff and just talking about music and that kind of like unpacking everything of the what we just witnessed, and that was really kind of the feeling I was going for. And then also, it's funny because I was listening to, it was loosely, not based on, but influenced by, there was about 2 years ago, I really got into Dave Douglas's Tiny Bell Trio. And there was some feeling of that, because I used to go see Dave too, and it kind of reminded me of both the feeling of that post-gig kind of talking about music, and Dave had these kind of earthy, ostinato tunes, even though that was not quite an ostinato, but like this kind of like bed of guitar stuff that I'm spacing on who the guitar player is right now, but it doesn't matter. But it kind of, there was this kind of loosey, tiny bell trio element to it too that I kind of like. More those after the fact. You ever write a tune, and then you're like, oh, this reminds me of that guy's tunes. You know, it was kind of like I've kind of connected the line. But I could see how that might have been inside of me kind of percolating.
Very cool. I love that tune. The whole record is, really nice. So what's next? Is this band touring? Do you have ideas for Will Be Fire 2?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I really think this band has some legs. I mean, we got off to a bad start because, you know how it works. So I set up the recording day, then got the publicist, and we set the release date, and we did everything, and everything was rolling. And then I was starting to book gigs, because typically I do a tour, you know, and Pete, and this is one of the few projects I wouldn't use any subs for. Other projects I would sub. So like to me, the drum chair we could probably sub out. But Pete and Marcus and I, there's this trio of stuff. And so Pete was on tour with Manhattan Transfer, their 50th anniversary thing, and Marcus was busy with teaching and other commitments, so I decided not to do. So we have some gigs coming up in the summer, and I'm trying to build a little tour around a couple things I have already. And but I do think a second recording will be in the works at some point. I'm actually writing music for a different recording for this year, but I will definitely be, I think this is going to stay in the rotation.
Before I let you go, what's the new recording you're writing for?
It's going to be, well, I've had this group, Big Sackba, which is 3 trombones and tuba, which is very much based on like a world saxophone quartet for trombones. But I would like to kind of fuse my two worlds, and I would like to do not a Latin jazz, because it's not that at all, but all my compositions, but we're going to bring in some Latin percussionists and do a whole record like that with the 4 brass and some percussion. And part of it is going to be a suite. One of my earliest bands that really was impactful in my career in New York was a band called Viento de Agua, and it was this bomba en plena fusion band incorporating jazz and other rock elements. And a guy named Tito Matos was the band leader, or one of the band leaders. They were co-band leaders, and he led this kind of a rebirth of it, because it's the only indigenous rhythm from Puerto Rico, and it became this like folkloric thing, and like what your great grandfather listened to, and he brought back, and David Sanchez used them, Eddie Palmieri would use them, and Miguel Zenon used Tito, because he was the master planero, and we were very good friends, and he, so not to be a bummer on your show, he passed away suddenly a couple years ago as well. Had a heart attack, and so I'm writing a suite of music. Not the whole record, but part of that is going to be a tribute to Tito, and we're going to use some plana. I mean, in my own way, like a deconstructed, like it won't be some straight up plana stuff, but that's a big part. It's going to be a big part of that recording.
All right, I look forward to hearing that. Joe, great to see you. Great to catch up and hear your music, man. I wish you all the best, and be safe out there. Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me, David. Super fun. I really appreciate it.
Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Van Doren Reeds and Mouthpieces. Be sure and check out the Van Doren Advisory Studio in New York City for all your sound sculpting needs. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Arlen's Good Beer in Bowling Green, Ohio.
Engineered by Marco Mendoza. Visit his website at engineeredbymarco.com.
The theme music is No FOMO, Mofo by yours truly. Produced by David Bixler. Be sure and subscribe to Liner Notes wherever you find your podcasts. If you like what you hear, I ask that you consider supporting Liner Notes financially. You can do this by going to the Liner Notes tab at davidbixler.com. Thank you for your consideration.